Have you ever heard of the Titulus Crucis?
No,
You've never heard of the Titulus Crucis?
the you told me the writings on the cross.
Yeah, you know how the
I
Gospels say
never.
there was a sign on the cross, and it was
Yeah,
written
yeah,
in
yeah.
Greek, Hebrew, and Latin. Not
That is the
necessarily in that
autograph
order,
of
but
Pontius Pilate.
well, I don't know about that. Does it
He
say
well, the
he wrote it with
gospel
his
said that
hand?
he wrote it himself.
Does it really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Does it really?
Does it really? The Pilate said,
Does it really?
I wrote what I've written.
Well, that could just be him speaking in terms of authority. Like he commanded somebody to do it, and because it was his authority that was over it, he says that he wrote it. You know, like if
Really?
I'm a ruler and I tell this guy, hey, go write that, and somebody says, no, don't say that. I say, what I have written stays written because it was my authority. It doesn't mean he wrote it with his hand.
Yeah, I guess it
It could
could
just
be,
mean he had
but it
somebody
doesn't
else
read
wrote it.
like that. It doesn't read.
You're reading that too literally.
I could be, but I don't feel like that when I read that.
Okay, well, minimally, you have to say that's your opinion, and it's not
Okay,
certain. Yeah,
okay.
you have to say minimally you have to say that he could have written it, but it also could not be his autograph. It doesn't have to be.
No, okay,
So
okay. Mm,
I'll be open and accept that it could be, but you can't prove that he wrote it because it says that. He could just be speaking like as an authority over it who wrote it.
mm,
Anyways,
okay.
that's a small issue. The point is that you have this Titulus Crucis, and so
Mm,
it's in Rome. Um,
mm.
so this is a drawing of it. You can see the real thing if you Google it, but this is
Ah,
a drawing of it.
okay.
And so it was cut, and so the history of it says that Helen, Constantine's mother, she
Mm,
found it. She dug it up and
right.
she cut it into parts and sent it to different
Ah,
churches. And she kept a part of it. And this is the part that she kept. And
uh,
somehow it was lost, but it ended up getting in
mm,
Rome, but it was lost for a long time. And then they rediscovered it in the walls when they were rebuilding the church in Rome, Peter's Basilica. And
mm.
so it was lost for hundreds of years, and then they rediscovered it very recently, and then they put
Oh,
it on display. And so that's kind of the history of it. That's how they trace the
mm,
history of it. And paleographically, the
mm,
scholar who looked at it says that he thinks that it
mm.
is first century. No, the carbon dating dates it to the 11 to 1200s, but that happened with the Shroud of Turin, you know,
Yeah.
and see, we don't know like who these people are who dated it. We don't know, you know, like the Shroud of Turin is definitely a conspiracy. The scholars definitely faked that. Like, there's no like it's pretty clear. Like they met privately, they convened, and
Yeah.
they made that date up. And then later dates have confirmed that it is ancient, more ancient than that.
Mm,
So I think a
yeah.
similar thing happened for the Titulus Crucis.
Mm,
I think that either the carbon dating is wrong or the
mm,
scholars are, I think it's a conspiracy. I think the scholars
mm,
fudged it because they don't want, you know, they don't want to have evidence that clear of Jesus
mm,
of Nazareth. So I believe it. I believe it, and I'm sharing it with you
mm,
because I thought it was an interesting thing, and and also because it helps us understand the Gospels and stuff. I want to show you this. I want to show you a reconstruction of the whole thing and what the whole thing
mm.
looked like. So this is a reconstruction of what they think minus the thorns and the nails and stuff, but just the board. This is a reconstruction of what they think it looked like. Now, it's actually not exactly like this though, because they say that the Romans would have painted the back in chalk, so it would have looked white, and then they would have put ink in the engraving so that it would stand out against the white chalk of the board. So agate, so that's kind of interesting, but you know, it's not something we think about, you know, and
Mm.
normally in the movies, you know, it looks like a normal board, but
Yeah.
apparently the Romans would have chalked it so it would have looked white, and then they would have put the ink in the carving, and so it would have
Yeah,
really stood
like
out. And
somehow
and
I
so
feel why the Greek and Latin are like reversed. I
yeah,
mean,
that's what I wanted to mention next. Is
okay,
there's a
okay.
lot one of the reasons for it being authentic is that it's not what you would expect. Like
Mm,
yeah, first of all it's Hebrew on top, and then you
mm,
have Greek in the middle, and
mm,
then Latin on bottom. Now this does not follow either of the orders in the two Gospels that mention this. They
mm,
mention it in a different order. Like they mention like Greek, Latin, Hebrew, or Greek, Hebrew, or
mm,
Hebrew, or like Hebrew, Latin, Greek. There's only two Gospels that mention the order of how it was written, and
mm,
this does not follow either order of what you see in the Gospel. So both of the Gospels have a different order, and this has a different order than both of the Gospels. So they're all in a
Mm,
different order. And so that suggests that this isn't a forgery, because if somebody was forging this, they would want it to agree with at least one of the Gospels. And then the second reason to
interesting.
think this is not a forgery is because it's in reverse. Like, that's just not what you would expect. But it looks like because the Hebrew was written first and the Hebrew goes from right to left,
Mm,
that the last part was written from right to left too, in the Greek and in the Latin. Now,
interesting.
this is actually not uncommon in that time period, though, because in the first century, they had something called, I forget the name, it's called boustrophon, I think is how you say it, where they would write from left to right or right to left in Greek and Latin. This is a known thing. So this
Mm,
actually fits with the conventions of the times. If it was more ideal to write it from right to left, they would do that. And so I think that, and so this actually fits. This is what you would expect in the time period, but it doesn't fit with what you would expect a forger would do in the 1100s or something, because they
yes,
didn't do it like that.
right.
And so so I find this to be really fascinating
Mm,
for that reason. Now, this is actually the one you're looking at is not an exact representation. Hang on, let me pull up a better reconstruction.
mm.
If you actually look at the thing, so this is what it actually looks like right now in Rome. It's on display right now. If you
Ah,
actually look at the thing, there's evidence that they abbreviated some of the letters. Hang on, I think I actually have this in a screenshot. I
interesting.
do. I do. Okay, hang on. Okay, let me show you this. This is a better reconstruction. This is the one that the scholar who looked at it says this is the scholarly one. The other ones I've shown you I pulled offline. This is
Okay.
the scholarly one. Okay, so the scholar says it originally looked like this. You had it chalked, and then so it originally it looked white, and it had they put ink in the carving, and this is his exact this is what he thinks it actually looked like. Okay, so
Mm.
notice how in the Greek and the Latin they abbreviated Jesus' name. You
Yeah,
have Jesus, and then you just have an I here, and you have it
yeah,
abbreviated.
interesting.
That's also something you would not expect if it was an 11th century forgery for them to do
Hmm.
this, because it's less clear who you're talking about. Um, and so, anyways, you have Yeshua Nazarene Melech Yahudim. So
Yehudaim,
it's
yeah.
Jesus the Nazarene, King of the Jews. And then
Mm-hmm.
here in Greek, it's Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And in Latin, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Now, notice that the initials in the Latin part matches the initials you see above the cross in the Catholic Church. You have INR for Rex, and
Yeah,
then
yes, that's right.
INR I. So it matches what you would expect from the tradition you see in the
Mm.
Catholic Church. So let me show you a Catholic cross. Well, I'm
I
sure
know
you've
that.
seen it, but I'll
Yeah,
just show you anyways because
yeah,
it's
okay.
fun to go. It's fun to show you. Okay, so
Yeah,
see,
yeah,
they
yeah.
have this in their tradition. They have INRI as the initial, and so
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
actually fits with the words that are actually written on this cross. Now, of course, they have it from left to right, and so there's some features that are, I guess you could say, lost or
Mm.
changed, but they're following in general. They keep the gist of the truth, right? They keep
Yeah,
the
yeah,
gist of
yeah.
the tradition, and so they have the right initials. So I think that's really interesting. I think the ordering is interesting. Apparently, when
Mm.
Matthew and Luke wrote, or maybe it's John, where he mentions the
Mm.
three languages, in the two Gospels that mention it,
Mm.
um, apparently they were not caring about the order whenever
Right.
they wrote it.
Mm.
They just wrote it. They just give you a list. They didn't care about the order. So I find it interesting that,
Mm.
and if this is true, if this is the real Titulus Crucis, if this is really what it
Mm.
looked like, then I find it interesting that it's Hebrew first, then Greek, then Latin. And that actually matches what Jerome says about the languages. Remember, Jerome says that
Mm.
Hebrew is like the fountain of wisdom, and Greek is like the rivers that flow from it, and Latin
Mm.
are like little trickles, the
Mm.
puddles that are left
Yeah,
over.
yeah,
So you
yeah.
see the order preserved in a mystical way in Jerome.
Interesting.
And so yeah,
Hmm.
it is very interesting, isn't it? It's interesting that they would put Hebrew first, Greek in second, and then Latin at the bottom.
Mm.
Um, it's also
Yeah.
interesting to me that it looks so, to be honest with you, it doesn't really look very pretty, does it? I mean, it's not perfectly
Well,
lined
it's
up.
for the criminals. It's like very
Yeah,
like
yeah,
randomly
yeah,
written.
yeah. And that's another reason to think it's believable, right? Because
Mm.
if this was a forgery, in the 11th century, you maybe the scribe would want to make it look pretty, but he doesn't. There's spelling differences too. Like in the
Interesting.
Vulgate, in the Vulgate, Nazarene is spelled different than it is on this Titulus Crucis. So if this was a
Ah,
forgery, you would expect that the scribe would spell it right, but there's differences in
mm,
spelling. And
Nazarenus.
so that's another reason to suggest that it's authentic.
Interesting.
It also look at this ligature here. He puts the omicron and the upsilon together in this ligature. Um, I find that
Yeah,
kind of interesting. There's a lot of interesting stuff about
yeah.
this. Now again, though, the only part of it that we actually have is the one that I've shown you. It's just a small part that they're reconstructing into that.
Oh.
You can see a bunch of different things online here. Like the only
Mm,
part we actually have is this
ah,
part here. But it's enough to tell you what it looked like, apparently. So, um,
yeah, yeah. That's a part of the true cross.
I guess since the his name isn't fully preserved, it could be that it was spelt fully. I don't know, but for
Mm,
some reason that scholar thinks that it was abbreviated. So I don't know. I guess it could have been spelt fully. I guess that's something that is unclear. But
yeah.
yeah, it looks something like that. Whenever
It's
I
interesting.
saw, there's a good documentary about it you can
Huh.
find on YouTube.
So, because I was thinking, like you write Omicron and Upsilon together, that was a manuscript thing. Like, does that trace back to like
Well,
pre-manuscript?
so the scholar who looked at it was a looked at it in terms of paleography, and that's
Uh-huh.
why he was convinced that it was ancient,
Ah.
because the paleography convinced him. So I'm not familiar enough with the paleography to say myself. I would have to look into that myself, but
Mm,
that's what he said. He said that the
mm,
paleography is more convincing for it to be ancient. So
mm, mm,
yeah, that's something I have to look into, but. Um,
mm. I see.
yeah, so it's a good question. Yeah, it's a good
Mm.
question. Apparently, they did have ligatures back then like this.
Huh.
Now, they didn't have cursive script, but this isn't written
Right.
in cursive. It's written in the uncial or
Yeah,
the
yeah,
magisterial.
yeah,
So it's what you would
definitely.
expect.
Right, right, right. Yeah.
So in the documentary I saw, they said that only Matthew and Luke have the list, but yeah, I thought,
John
does
said that.
John have it?
John
John have
said
maybe okay. I thought it was Matthew and Luke, but maybe yeah, I thought John said it too. So what does John say?
that. John said Hebrew, Latin, and Greek.
Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. Okay,
Mm.
okay. I may have missed all that. Maybe they said Matthew and John. Does Luke have it? Does Luke have the order? Does Luke say the order of
Um,
the languages? Does he mention the three languages?
I don't remember. I don't see it there.
Oh, okay.
Hmm.
So John says Hebrew, Latin, and Greek, huh?
There's a textual variant in Luke says Greek, Latin, and Hebrew.
Oh, okay. Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. Is that what Matthew says? That could be
That's
a harmony with Matthew. They could have a
let me
scribal harmony with Matthew.
no, Matthew doesn't say that.
Matthew doesn't say that. So it's Luke and John then.
Yeah, maybe Luke
I
and
thought in the
John.
documentary they said it was Matthew and Luke. Maybe I missed all that. I don't know. You could see the documentary and tell me what you think.
Hmm.
Um,
Take a look
yeah.
at
Anyways,
John. Take a look at John 19:19.
I don't have my Bible with me out here at the moment. What does it say?
Let me just take out my old-fashioned King James Bible and show you.
You know,
19.
what's also interesting is what is written is different in the Gospels. Like one says Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. One says
Yeah,
something different, right?
the people. I heard the interpretation is that it is uh, different gospels are recording different languages. Like they're recording different. Like Matthew was recording the
Yeah,
Hebrew
yeah.
one, and Mark was recording the Greek one. Things like that.
What is the difference exactly, though? Is it? I know that one of them says this is Jesus, King of the
Yeah,
Jews,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah, that's exactly.
So I think if this Titulus Crucis is true, if this is real, then that means that they're not recording different languages. One gospel author is just kind of paraphrasing or giving you the gist of it. He's not
Well,
trying to give you
we don't. I
the
mean,
exact wording.
we don't have the entire plate. We only have a part of it. The rest is just reconstruction. So, I mean,
That's true, but minimally we know that it has King of the Jews, right? So
Right, right, right,
doesn't
right.
one of
Yeah, it's
doesn't
still
one of the
that.
gospels
King of Jews is
doesn't say that, right?
no,
Or
no,
is
no.
King of the Jews
All
in
the
every?
gospels says the King of Jews. The King of
So
Jews
what's the
is
difference? The difference is one doesn't say Nazareth. Is that right?
Matthew says this is Jesus, King of the Jews.
Right. Okay. So Matthew doesn't say Nazareth. So that means that Matthew was not intending to give you it word for word. He was just giving you the
Maybe.
main thing.
So and Mark say
Because the Titulus Crucis has Nazareth in all three.
so the reconstructed part or the actual part?
The actual
Yeah,
thing
yeah.
has Nazareth in all three lines.
Okay.
Parts of it in all three lines.
Okay. Mark says King of the Jews.
Marsikia. So yeah, so I think you
There's
shouldn't
a
think of it like one is giving you a different line. I think it's more like the
yeah.
Gospels are doing their own thing.
Yeah,
One
they're
is
just
giving you like a summary or
very
the
yeah,
gist of
yeah,
it.
yeah, something. So
What does
uh
Luke say? Does Luke say? Luke doesn't say it, does he?
this is the King of the Jews. He Luke says uh Luke says this is the King of Jews, and John says King of the Jews, Jesus of Nazareth.
King of the Jews, Jesus of Nazareth, in that order?
Yeah, that's what I want to read to you. And Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross. And the writing was Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Sorry, the Chinese translation has the reverse order.
Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Okay, so the one in John is the one that is actually that's the word for word
Yeah.
that's actually on the Titulus Crucis.
And he said
So
Pilate wrote it.
Pilate wrote, yeah, okay. So that is, yeah, so that is the one that is, and it makes sense to me that John would be the one that would put it exactly because
Mm.
John was close to the cross and he was observing it very closely. We know that he was,
Yes.
so that would make sense. Whereas Luke is getting it from an eyewitness source, and maybe he got it from one of the Marys, but maybe Mary wasn't paying that close attention, but she knew generally what it said. Whereas John is a first witness; he's a witness himself,
Hmm.
and he was there, and so he was paying close attention to it, and so he
Yeah.
probably was paying attention to the detail, and that's why he gets it right. Another thing too is that maybe John has affiliation with the letters of Pilate and the Pilate literature, and maybe he has a closer connection.
Yes.
We also know that John there's an interesting thing in the Gospel of John where it says that he was a servant to the high priest. Do you remember this?
Yes.
Like during the trial, it says that John
Yes.
knew the
Yes.
high priest or something. He was a servant to the high priest or something
He
like that.
knew the servant of the high priest. It's his relative
Yeah,
or something.
yeah. So maybe because he has a closer connection as well. I don't know exactly. We can only speculate, but it does. I do see that it seems like John is recording the actual thing, and
Mm,
then in the other gospels they're giving you like
mm,
the summary in their own word. I mean, we know that they do this
mm,
elsewhere. Like they kind of say things a little differently from
mm,
their own perspective. So yeah, it makes sense to me. Now,
mm.
apparently, the order was not intended to be in the exact order. But notice, though, that John does put the Hebrew first. So that is interesting. He puts Hebrew, and the Greek and Latin are very similar. They're very
Yeah,
similar in
yeah,
the way they
yeah,
look. So you
yeah.
could argue
He
that
kind
is
of got it
a
wrong.
you could argue that minimally he puts the Hebrew first, and
Yeah, yeah,
that is pretty. I think that's pretty compelling to me. It's compelling to me. He puts the Hebrew first, and then he has these same words. That's very
yeah.
close to the
I
Titulus
think
Crucis.
he didn't really intend to record the exact order of which language is written first. But the point is that he has the impression that the Hebrew is first. So that's very like that really
Yeah,
stands
yeah,
out because Hebrew is really unique. So he puts
yeah,
Hebrew first and
yeah.
then
It's close enough to make you think it's real, and it's also not close enough to make you not think it's not real because
yeah,
it's not exactly the same. So it's
yeah,
not like a
yeah,
scribe copying John, but it's also
yeah.
not dissimilar enough,
Mm,
so it's close enough. So it's yeah, I think I'm pretty convinced about it. I thought the documentary was convincing, but you see
mm,
it, judge on your own.
yeah.
So to me, right now, I think that and the Shroud of Turin
Mm.
are like really strong, like really, really strong. It's not just evidence, it's also just to help you understand,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
for us, but I think like for apologetical reasons, those are pretty strong. It's the only thing that holds people back is the carbon dating, but for that, you just have to have a critical mind and realize that people, scholars are
I don't really
there's people.
believe carbon dating because carbon dating is not that reliable. Carbon date, like with so much air pollution going on nowadays, all the samples are polluted. You can't trust any carbon dating nowadays.
And not only that, but the rate of change of carbon in the atmosphere is not consistent. It's changing. Like
Ah, yeah.
people have studied that for 200 years. Like we know that the rate of change is different. It's constantly changing. And so carbon
Ah,
dating assumes that the rate of change
right.
is the same. Well, if it's
Yeah.
not the same, how can you date stuff?
Exactly.
The,
Exactly.
so it's going to give you a false result. It's going to give you a
Yeah.
skewed result. So I'm
Yeah.
with you. I agree. I think that even if they give a favorable result, it may not necessarily mean anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
I trust the paleography more. I
Yeah.
trust the
Yeah.
circumstances more. Like the circumstances
Yeah.
convincing to me.
Yeah.
Like it was like they say it was lost for so many years, and
Mm.
like why would they hide that? In the walls of a
Mm.
church. Like why would they hide that? Like if it was nothing, if it was a fake,
Mm.
like I don't know. It could be a coincidence, but there's a lot of
Mm.
things surrounding it that made it seem convincing to me.
I think the very fact that you presented to me today makes me think it's authentic because it's a
Why is
very special
that?
day today. Today is the one of the 12 major feasts of the church. It is the universal exaltation of the Holy Life-giving cross.
Oh, well, there
Yes.
you go. Okay, well, there you
So I
go.
think God
Um,
is witnessing to me. I wasn't able to because I was editing the book, so I wasn't able to go to the church today. Um, but
yeah,
um, I'm very like I'm very blessed that God has shown me this in
yeah.
on the
You
feast
should
day.
investigate it. I'll send you a link to the documentary later. It really
Thanks,
inspired.
please do. Yeah.
What this was the first time I learned about it too, and I'll be honest with you. Another reason why I believe it is because whenever I was like looking at it and meditating on it, I had this feeling. I had this
Mm.
feeling that it was that this was. I had this feeling that it was.
Mm.
I know. That sounds like, oh, you
Yeah.
had a feeling. Okay, but I had a feeling that this was
Mm.
something that this was real, and it gave me this inspiration, like just a similar kind of feeling that I had like whenever I was discovering the Dead Sea Scrolls
Mm.
and Enoch and stuff, and I was discovering these extra books of the Scripture. It's like
Mm.
this is a real thing, like the same kind
Yeah.
of feeling that I had when I started studying the Shroud of Turin. I think that this is a I think this is a real thing. Like
Yeah.
all the other relics about the cross, I don't know. I need to investigate that. But this
Mm.
one, I think this is a real thing. It's very
Mm.
believable. You can trace it historically. You can at least
Mm.
trace it back to Helen, back to Constantine. And so,
Mm.
I'm pretty
Yeah.
convinced that this is the real deal.
Mm.
And and also I think this is the only fragment of the sign left. Apparently, the other parts that were cut up, we don't know
Mm.
where those are right now.
They probably are
So
preserved in other parts, in other churches as simply a part of the true cross, but maybe the writings are not recognizable anyway.
yeah, maybe.
Mm.
At least here's what I think, though. At least I think that somehow, for some reason, God had this thing preserved for our times,
Mm.
because it was lost in Rome in the walls of that church for hundreds of years. It's
Mm.
almost like the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's like it was lost and just
Yeah.
to be rediscovered later. It's like
Uh,
so it gave me a good feeling. Like if it was, so it gave me this feeling like this is something really, really amazing. So there's a lot of reasons to think it's authentic as well as we talked about. And so I mean, we can't be for sure, but
mm.
I think I'm like 80% pretty
Mm.
sure this is the thing. So this is the real deal.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
That's
unless
pretty.
there's something strong to go against it, but we already say we don't believe in carbon dating. So
So yeah. I think it's authentic too. Like and yeah, Saint Constantine and Helen were famous for were really like famous for finding the true cross. If it was in the hand of Saint Helen, then I think that's it. Like that's what it's.
yeah.